Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today I got a really fun, really interesting, and quasi-questioning video for you guys this evening, because it's a year-end special. We're going to be talking about where retro gaming is going in the future, because over the last year to 18 months, I've noticed a complete shift in what retro gaming really is to a lot of people, and I've noticed not many people really like the real hardware anymore. They want MiSTer FPGA, and they want software emulation that come with a lot of enhancements, which I actually think is a good thing, because as I always said on the channel, I do not care how you play your video games. I just care that you still continue to enjoy them into the future. And I feel like we're hitting a generation now where the original hardware is more of a hindrance than it is actually something that they want to have on the shelves. People want to be able to play the games they want to play, enhance them how they want to enhance them, and basically go from there. So I think the days of tons of people wanting that Neo Geo AES console under the television are probably dying off. You leave me a comment down below and you tell me what you think, but honestly, I do not get any questions about buying or collecting Neo Geo AES hardware or games or even MVS. I get questions about which software emulator is the best for Neo Geo, and whether or not stuff like MiSTer FPGA or Analogue Pocket is worth it for a Neo Geo experience, and that's definitely been a big shift since I started the channel. Back when I first talked about Neo Geo, people either had a console or couldn't comment enough that they wanted to start getting into Neo Geo collecting, and I always warned them all off because you need to bring a lot of money. To play this one game Matra Melee with a Neo Geo AES, you're looking at about $3,500 just to experience that one title. On software emulation, you can do it absolutely for free, and on MiSTer FPGA, yeah, you have to spend some money, but it's going to be fundamentally much less expensive. And the question is, and I'll give you my answer, is it any less fun playing a Neo Geo game on software emulation on Steam Deck or on MiSTer FPGA? And the answer is absolutely not. In some ways it's more fun because I don't have to worry about hooking up my AES to a CRT or to a scaler, getting everything ready. I can just pick up my Steam Deck, or I can turn on my MiSTer FPGA and just start playing. Is something like Final Burn Neo on the Steam Deck or any other emulation system going to be the one-to-one perfect experience for Neo Geo? It is not. There might be some slight deviations, but is it going to affect your fun and performance in the game? Absolutely not. If you want to go a step above, you can do something like the MiSTer Pi for $160 for a triple stack, giving you the entirety of the Neo Geo library with decap chips, well underneath what it would cost us to play one Neo Geo game. Well, let's talk about stuff like PlayStation 1. When I show PlayStation 1 footage and I don't enhance it in DuckStation, the comments are always saying that they wished I had enhanced it or that's how they play. And something like Mega Man Legends here, if you want the retail copies for North America in English, you're talking about $560 just to play 3 games. Most of my collection is comprised of Japanese discs. I love the artwork, and honestly, it's allowed me to have a collection for much cheaper. But for the most part, I would say 9 out of 10 of you, when you talk about PlayStation 1, are talking about playing in DuckStation, and that makes total sense. It's an absolutely free software emulator that can put so many incredible, amazing enhancements on the games. It's immediately easy to use. You can understand it and pick it up, and if you can't, I do have Emulation Night School playlists on the channel. But being able to play something like Crash Bandicoot with enhanced graphics, with texture perspective correction, and in 16:9 at the native frame rates, is just something that your original PlayStation 1 can't do, and even though MiSTer FPGA has enhancements, it won't get that far. And I feel like, especially if people didn't grow up with this hardware, they want the enhancements. They don't want to see software rendering in 4:3. Even if I go back to software rendering here, it does look good in DuckStation, but I feel like for nostalgia purposes alone, people just aren't that into the original look anymore. Not many people are collecting CRT televisions, not many people are collecting real hardware. They just want to play games, and they want them to look as good as possible, so they're not staring at the screen thinking it kind of looks a little bit like garbage. I don't think the original look is bad, but people have different opinions, and I will say right now on MiSTer FPGA or software emulation, you're never fighting with the hardware. You're not HDMI modding anything, you're not trying to replace lasers when yours gets weak and doesn't want to read a game. And that is the downside of original hardware. It can be a full-time job just keeping it running, and if you go to sit down and play a game and it's not working, you kind of have no other options other than just not to play that game. Or something like MiSTer FPGA, Robert FPGA Zoom Space's core here, removes that barrier for entry. You have a ton of different enhancements, and you never have to worry about your MiSTer FPGA's laser getting weak, because there is no laser. And this is really the shift I've noticed over the last 18 months or so. People want to make sure that there is nothing between them and their gameplay time, and I'm assuming it's all because we got a little bit older, we do have commitments and responsibilities, and now if we have an hour to play video games at night, maybe we don't want to screw around with that original hardware, maybe we don't want to take the game off the shelf, maybe we just want to load up the file and say, I can play and have fun. Is having the game on the shelf in your collection enough for you though? Answer me that down below. Because I will say personally, when I want to play PlayStation 1 now, I go straight to my MiSTer FPGA. I don't take my PS1 or PS2 off the shelf. And speaking of PS2, I would say if I want to play any of my PlayStation 2 library these days, I want PCSX2 with the graphical enhancements. It just takes a game and makes it look closer to PlayStation 3 than it does PlayStation 2. The more vibrant the graphics, the more simple the geometry, the better result you're going to get out of this. But honestly, PlayStation 2 is the one console I probably have hooked up the least in any single year. Unless I'm capturing from real hardware, particularly video, the PlayStation 2 just sits on my shelf, as do the games, because PCSX2 can basically run near to the entirety of the North American, European, and Japanese libraries, and you get so many new benefits for it. Something like Ape Escape here, if you dial the internal resolution up to 4K, and you just basically turn every enhancement on, you get a game that looks like it could be a launch day PlayStation 3 title, outside of the fact that the geometry isn't as advanced as you would see on the polygonal models on the PlayStation 3 era. So for me, at least when it comes to PlayStation 2, I skip the hardware entirely unless I'm playing on my CRT television, which I do now and again, but even that, with the scalers, which we'll get into in a minute, isn't something that I do as much as I used to. And trust me, when it comes to PCSX2, there's so many options. You could basically play around to your heart's content, and you could even get lost in pixel peeping versus playing the game. Try not to do that. And the era of people wanting stuff like a PSX console, the giant DVR, PlayStation 1 and 2 from Japan, are basically dead. Keeping this hardware alive is just basically for the hardcore, and apparently I do count myself among that, because even though I might not go near this hardware as much as I used to, it will remain in my collection, but it is temperamental. Just opening this stupid door on camera to show you what was behind it for this video, it came off the track, and now it's probably going to give me 5 minutes or so just to realign that off camera so I can put it back on the shelf. My point is that it just takes a lot of time to keep these things running. And of course, now we have scaler options to our heart's content. Grab yourself a RetroTink 4K, hook up your original console, and you're off to the races without any modifications. Or maybe you want something like a Pixel FX Morph 4K. Maybe you have an old frame MiSTer sitting around that you used to use for arcade captures and still do because it is incredible. Or maybe you have something like an OSSC underneath the TV. Obviously I have a few scalers here for videos, but my point is that now people don't seem to want to modify consoles as much, and maybe they don't even want to scale them that much. People love putting MiSTer FPGA direct video mode into an HDMI capable scaler and just doing it that way, which is amazing. Even stuff like Dreamcast, I have a Dreamcast, more than one, and I will use VGA going into my RetroTink 4K, and I will get an absolutely incredible experience on my television, and in my opinion, Dreamcast has never looked so good outside of the RetroTink 4K and a VGA box. But the question is that an expense you want to bear? Because I move over to Flycast, I get internal rendering resolution bumps, I get a clean output, and if I just hook up a PC to my television, even something low test like a potato, you're going to be able to run this, and it's going to look spectacular as well. And that's where I really see the retro gaming landscape shifting right now. People are moving way more towards software emulation because it's gotten so much better in the last 2-3 years. You have so many different enhancements and people just really love that. Or something like the Pixel FX Morph 4K, another great 4K scaler that right now is at least HDMI only in, but you can get it for $200 or cheaper if you find one used. And this will allow you to plug something like your MiSTer FPGA into the back of it, go direct video 1 mode, and get 4K out for about $400 total if you go the Mr. Pi route. And then from there you can play dozens upon dozens of home consoles, handhelds, and hundreds of arcade cores, not to even count some of the PCs out there for the FPGA cores as well. And you can do that all for $400, and that is definitely something that people are really gravitating towards. FPGA combined together with a scaler, giving you basically everything with FPGA accuracy very quickly, because we have right here the RetroTink 4K on something like Dracula X on Super Nintendo, and I'll move over to the Morph 4K as well. While the RetroTink 4K is definitely more fully featured and allows for analog support in, if you want to do this on a budget, you can drop $400 in total and have the entirety of MiSTer FPGA in direct video mode scaled to 4K to your television with basically the exact same image depending on what filters you put on. Or maybe you just want to grab an Analogue Pocket and sit on the couch and play some video games, or maybe you even want to go cheaper and grab an $80 Ambernic device and play it that way, because I will tell you right now, for all of the hardware I own, for the 6 MiSTer FPGAs that are sitting in my office for video projects, when I play video games at night, generally it's on my Steam Deck and I'm lying on my couch staring at that small screen. I just don't feel like setting up sometimes, and that's how I end up playing the games. Or maybe you want to grab a Raspberry Pi and that's good enough for you as well. I get it. But I'm not saying that original hardware isn't fun. But in the last couple of years, I've really leaned in hard to the rare and exotic arcade hardware, the stuff that either doesn't emulate well enough to be enjoyable to play, or the stuff that doesn't emulate whatsoever. Games that were never ported off arcade boards and brought home, the only way to experience them is with real hardware in your collection. People always ask me about collecting arcade boards, and I tell pretty much everyone, if you do not know some electrical engineering, if you don't know how to solder, if you don't have a multimeter or an oscilloscope, it's going to be very difficult to do stuff like this on the 3D side of things. But this is really where my interest lies. I'm not saying I'm done with original hardware, I'm never going to sell any of mine, but at this point in time when people think about getting into retro gaming, it really isn't on the original hardware side of things because no one wants to own a microscope and start checking different pin legs under that to see why one of their boards, a game that does not emulate well whatsoever and always crashes, doesn't want to pass the security checks. This is the deep end of the pool, and I recommend everyone just grab their pool floaties and stay in the shallow end. Don't be an idiot like me. It's big, it's cumbersome, it takes a lot of storage space, and you're spending more time repairing the hardware than you actually are playing it. But for me, that's what I really love about original hardware. Its quirky nature, the strange things it does, the different connections, the different output styles and video signals, and just how many strange games are out there. Because something like Invasion the Abductors, I recently picked up an arcade PCB for this. I'd wanted it for the longest time because in MAME it does have a crashing issue where intermittently the game will just completely lock up and you can't play any further. I've never gotten a full playthrough of that game in MAME, so I went out to find the original hardware for it. And this is the direction in which I think original hardware will never truly die. There's always going to be someone out there that wants to put an NES cart into an NES or a PlayStation 1 disc into a PlayStation 1, but those people are definitely thinning in numbers. When people talk to me in the comments now, they want enhancements, they want emulation, they want FPGA. Not many people anymore ask me about collecting original hardware. And I really do think that's a positive thing, because I don't want any barriers of entry between people that want to get into retro gaming or back into it and their enjoyment. You don't have to go out and drop $10, $15, $20, $30,000 on a bunch of hardware and scalers to have a good time. You can download MAME, you can download DuckStation, you can download PCSX2, Final Burn Neo, and start playing games and having as much fun as you remember them back in the day, because all the original hardware in the world, all the FPGA devices in the world do not make a game any more or any less fun. It's just a different way to play the title you wanted to. Go play Super Mario World on FPGA, on real hardware, and on software emulation. It's still the same legendarily good game as it always was. And I saved this video for the end of the year, making it at least, because I've seen such a huge shift in 2024 in people's opinions on real hardware versus emulation versus FPGA, and I expect the landscape to change even more in 2025. We're to the point now where you can emulate stuff like PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch. You're emulating current gen stuff, and whether or not you think that's okay, the reality is the technology is just marching forward so fast. I wonder if real hardware will ever be necessary again. Leave me your thoughts down below, but we're done. Bye bye.